In 1973, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency gave an order that should have erased a secret forever. Thousands of documents were pulled from CIA archives, loaded onto trucks, and destroyed. Files detailing one of the most disturbing chapters in American history were shredded, burned, and turned to ash. The people who gave that order believed the story would die with the paper. They believed no one would ever know what the United States government had done to its own citizens, in secret, for over 2 decades. They were wrong. Because tucked away in a forgotten warehouse, filed under something as mundane as budget records, a small collection of documents survived. Nobody remembered they were there. Nobody thought to destroy them. And years later, when an investigative journalist filed a routine request under the Freedom of Information Act, those surviving papers would surface, and they would expose a program so unsettling that even seasoned government investigators struggled to believe what they were reading. This is the story of that program. It's a story about fear, about a government convinced it was losing an invisible war, and about the ordinary people who paid the price for that fear. Some of them never even knew they were part of an experiment. To understand how something like this could happen, you have to go back to a moment when the world felt like it was standing on the edge of a cliff. World War II had just ended, and instead of peace, the United States found itself locked in a new kind of conflict with the Soviet Union. This wasn't a war fought with soldiers storming beaches. It was a war fought with information, propaganda, and fear. American intelligence officials became convinced that the Soviets, and later the Chinese, had discovered something terrifying, a way to control the human mind itself. That fear turned into panic during the Korean War, when captured American soldiers returned home with confessions praising communism, confessions many believed could only have come from something sinister. The word used to describe it was brainwashing, and it spread through Washington like wildfire. Intelligence officials asked a chilling question. If the enemy could reprogram a man's loyalty, rewrite his memories, or force him to confess to crimes he never committed, then what was stopping them from turning American soldiers, diplomats, or even the president himself into unwitting puppets? The CIA's director at the time, Allen Dulles, became convinced the United States was falling dangerously behind in this invisible battlefield of the mind. And in his mind, there was only one solution. If the enemy was experimenting with mind control, then so would the United States. In April of 1953, Dulles authorized a program that would remain one of the most secretive projects in CIA history. It was called MKUltra. The man chosen to lead it was a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, a quiet, unassuming scientist who walked with a limp and spoke with a stutter, and who would go on to become one of the most powerful and least known figures in Cold War intelligence. Gottlieb ran the CIA's technical services staff, and under his direction, MKUltra was given an almost limitless mandate. Officially, the program's stated goals involved interrogation methods, resistance to enemy interrogation, and behavior modification. Researchers were tasked with exploring whether drugs, hypnosis, and psychological manipulation could be used to extract information, alter memory, or influence decision-making. It's worth pausing here, because popular retellings of MKUltra often stretch far beyond what the surviving evidence actually supports. There is no verified documentation of the CIA successfully creating a hypnotically controlled assassin, despite decades of rumors inspired by Cold War fiction. What the documents do show is disturbing enough on its own. Over the next several years, MKUltra would balloon into more than 140 separate sub-projects, touching the lives of an unknown number of people, many of whom never gave their consent. The experiments themselves grew more unsettling with each passing year. Researchers dosed unwitting subjects with LSD, a drug barely understood at the time, to observe how it affected memory, perception, and psychological stability. Some subjects were CIA employees. Others had no idea they were being tested at all. Sleep deprivation experiments pushed subjects for days without rest, monitoring how exhaustion broke down mental resistance. Sensory deprivation chambers cut off subjects from light, sound, and human contact for extended periods, sometimes inducing hallucinations. Hypnosis was tested as a tool for implanting suggestions or erasing memories. In some of the darkest corners of the program, subjects underwent repeated electroshock treatments alongside drug-induced comas, an approach one lead researcher called psychic driving, in an attempt to essentially erase a person's identity and rebuild it from nothing. One of the most extreme examples took place not in the United States, but in Montreal, Canada, at a hospital called the Allen Memorial Institute. There, a psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron, funded in part through a CIA front organization, subjected patients, many of them admitted for mild conditions like anxiety, to a technique he called psychic driving. Patients were put into drug-induced comas that sometimes lasted weeks, while tape recordings of the same phrase played on a loop over and over for hours at a time. Cameron believed he could erase a damaged personality and rebuild it from scratch. Instead, many of his patients emerged with permanent memory loss, unable to recognize their own children. Decades later, a group of Cameron's former patients sued both governments involved and eventually received settlements, though by then the damage to their lives could never be undone. Elsewhere, at Harvard University, a psychologist named Henry Murray ran a study involving stress interviews on undergraduate students, subjecting them to hostile, humiliating interrogations designed to break down their sense of identity. One of those undergraduates was a brilliant but withdrawn young mathematician. Decades later, he would become known to the entire country under a very different name, the Unabomber. Whether that experiment shaped what came later remains a subject of genuine historical debate, but the documented connection alone is enough to send a chill through anyone who hears it. Survivor accounts describe disorientation, memory loss, and psychological damage that lasted for the rest of their lives. And here's the detail that should unsettle you the most. Many of these people never knew they were part of a government experiment. They thought they were patients receiving treatment. They thought they were volunteers in ordinary medical research. They had no idea the United States government was testing the limits of the human mind on their bodies without their knowledge. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. MKUltra wasn't confined to secret government facilities hidden behind barbed wire. It reached directly into everyday American life through some of the most trusted institutions in the country. Using funding funneled through front organizations and supposedly independent research foundations, the CIA financed experiments at more than 80 institutions across North America, including universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. Professors applied for what looked like ordinary research grants, never realizing the money originated with the CIA. Patients in psychiatric hospitals became unwitting test subjects. At a federal narcotics hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, researchers offered addicted patients doses of morphine and other drugs as payment for participating in experimental drug trials, a practice that would be considered a profound ethical violation by any modern medical standard. Prisoners, desperate for reduced sentences or simple privileges, volunteered for experiments without fully understanding what they were agreeing to. The program's reach stretched from coast to coast, hidden behind a web of academic respectability that made it almost impossible to trace unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. Some of the most respected research institutions in the country had unknowingly become extensions of a secret intelligence program, and most of the professors involved had no idea their work was funded by the CIA at all. But if there's one story that captures the human cost of MKUltra more than any other, it's the story of a man named Frank Olson. Olson was a biochemist working for the United States Army, specializing in biological weapons research at Fort Detrick, Maryland. In November of 1953, Olson attended a private retreat with colleagues and CIA officials in rural Maryland. During that gathering, without his knowledge or consent, Olson was given a drink laced with LSD. What happened next set off a chain of events that remains disputed to this day. In the days following the retreat, colleagues noticed Olson had become deeply disturbed, anxious, and erratic. He was taken to New York, ostensibly to receive psychiatric help. On the night of the 28th of November, 1953, Frank Olson fell from the window of a room on the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel and died on the pavement below. For over 20 years, his family was told it was suicide, a tragic consequence of a man who had experienced some kind of breakdown. They accepted this story because they had no reason not to. Then, in 1975, everything changed. The Rockefeller Commission's investigation into CIA abuses briefly referenced an unnamed Army scientist who had died after being secretly dosed with a hallucinogenic drug. Olson's family recognized the story immediately. It was their father. The CIA hadn't just hidden the fact that they drugged him without consent. They had hidden the fact that his death might have had anything to do with it at all. Decades later, in 1994, Olson's body was exhumed, and a forensic examiner discovered evidence of a head injury inconsistent with the original explanation. Trauma that some experts believed occurred before the fall, not from it. The findings reignited a question that has never been definitively answered. Was Frank Olson's death a tragic accident, worsened by an experiment gone wrong, or was it something far more deliberate? The evidence remains disputed, and no conclusive proof of murder has ever been established. What remains certain, beyond dispute, is that a man died after his own government secretly drugged him and then lied to his family for over 2 decades about what really happened. If Frank Olson's story reveals the human tragedy behind MKUltra, the next chapter reveals just how far the program was willing to go to gather information, no matter how the methods might look in the light of day. It was called Operation Midnight Climax, and even among researchers who have studied MKUltra for years, it remains one of the most shocking discoveries buried within the surviving documents. Beginning in the 1950s, the CIA established a network of safe houses in cities, including San Francisco and New York. These weren't laboratories. They were ordinary-looking apartments, dressed to look unremarkable from the outside. Inside, the CIA installed hidden two-way mirrors and recording equipment. Sex workers, paid by the agency, were used to lure unsuspecting men back to these apartments, where their drinks were secretly dosed with LSD. CIA officers, hidden behind the mirrors, observed and recorded the men's reactions, studying how the drug affected behavior, inhibition, and vulnerability during intimate situations. The men involved had no idea they were part of a government experiment. They believed they were simply spending an evening in a stranger's apartment. In reality, they were unwitting subjects in a covert intelligence operation, one that operated for over a decade before it was finally shut down. It's one of the strangest details in the entire MKUltra story, and for years, almost no one outside the agency knew it had ever happened. By the early 1970s, cracks were beginning to form. Investigative journalists were asking uncomfortable questions about the CIA's domestic activities. The political climate, already strained by Watergate, left intelligence officials deeply nervous about what might surface if the wrong documents ended up in the wrong hands. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms made a decision that he likely believed would protect the agency forever. He ordered the destruction of nearly all MKUltra-related records. Boxes of files were pulled from storage, paper was shredded and burned in bulk. For Helms, it must have felt like closing a door that could never be reopened. But he was wrong, in a way that would come back to haunt the agency years later. Approximately 20,000 documents survived the purge, not because anyone deliberately preserved them, but because they had been misfiled in a financial records warehouse, filed under budget and accounting records, rather than the operational files marked for destruction. Nobody realized the mistake, and that clerical accident is the only reason the world knows about MKUltra today. In 1977, journalist John Marks filed a Freedom of Information Act request that unexpectedly turned up those surviving financial records. What followed was a reckoning. The Church Committee, formed 2 years earlier to investigate abuses across the intelligence community, had already uncovered troubling fragments of MKUltra's existence. But the newly discovered documents gave investigators something they'd never had before: real evidence, written in the CIA's own hand. Congress convened hearings. For the first time, senators sat across from CIA officials and demanded answers about experiments conducted on American citizens without their knowledge or consent. Senator Ted Kennedy chaired the 1,977 hearings, pressing officials for details that had been buried for a generation. Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who had run the program for over a decade, testified before Congress, offering only limited and often evasive answers, repeatedly claiming he could no longer recall the specifics of decisions he himself had authorized. No one involved in MKUltra was ever criminally charged. Survivors and family members, including the Olsen family, came forward publicly for the first time. Television cameras captured it all, broadcasting a program once buried under the highest levels of government secrecy directly into American living rooms. Even with those surviving documents, though, huge gaps remain, and it's important to separate what we actually know from what has grown around MKUltra in the decades since. The verified facts are damning enough on their own. The CIA did run a large-scale, secretive human experimentation program. It did test drugs and psychological manipulation on unwitting subjects. It did operate covert sexual entrapment schemes. It did destroy the majority of its own records to avoid accountability. But many of the more extraordinary claims that circulate online today, mind-controlled assassins, secret time travel research, links to alien technology, satanic ritual abuse networks, are not supported by any surviving documentary evidence. These theories emerged in the decades after MKUltra became public, filling the vacuum left by 20 years of destroyed records, with speculation that has little to no basis in the historical record. It's an understandable impulse. When a government destroys the evidence of its own wrongdoing, people naturally assume the worst and fill in the missing pieces with whatever story feels most dramatic. But historians and researchers who have spent years combing through the surviving 20,000 pages consistently point out that the real, documented history is damning enough without inventing anything further. The truth doesn't need embellishment. What the CIA actually did was disturbing enough without exaggeration, and blurring verified fact with unfounded rumor only makes it easier for people to dismiss the real history as conspiracy theory. So here's the question worth sitting with. Everything you've just learned exists only because of an accident, a handful of financial records misfiled in the wrong drawer decades ago. If those 20,000 pages had been destroyed along with everything else, MKUltra would likely be nothing more than a rumor today, whispered about by a handful of researchers with no way to prove any of it actually happened. That should unsettle you, because it raises a much larger question about government power, secrecy, and accountability. How many other programs never left a paper trail at all? How many stories were successfully erased, with no misfiled folder left behind to save them? We'll likely never know. What we do know is that for over 20 years, a democratic government experimented on its own citizens in secret, and very nearly got away with hiding it forever. The next time you hear a government insist that some program is too sensitive for the public to ever know about, remember Frank Olsen. Remember the patients in Montreal who woke up unable to recognize their own children. Remember the safe houses of Operation Midnight Climax. And remember that the only reason we know their names at all is because someone, somewhere, forgot to burn one box of paper. Secrets like this don't stay buried because they're too small to matter. They stay buried because someone decided they should. The difference, this time, came down to a filing error and nothing more.